Hi, you are engaging in the ELA Guidebooks Unit Justice. The purpose of this video is to learn more about the United States Civil Rights Movement and nonviolent protests that happened during this time in history. This will help you make historical connections as you read Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. Be sure to have your handout available and something to write with for the video. The Civil Rights Movement, which started in the late 1950s, achieved important rights for Black Americans that they had been denied for a long time. After the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution were supposed to guarantee equal rights for all Americans. But in the South, segregation of the races and denial of opportunities to Black Americans continued in the system known as Jim Crow laws. During World War II, some progress was made as President Roosevelt outlawed discrimination in the defense industry. Moreover, as the country fought for freedom around the world, many Black Americans began to wonder why they did not enjoy those same freedoms at home. In 1954, a series of landmark cases testing segregation that were pressed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, culminating in the Supreme Court's ruling in the Brown versus Board of Education case, which unanimously outlawed segregation in public schools. After the assassination of President Kennedy and the landslide election of Lyndon Johnson, Congress passed the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed racial discrimination in public accommodations in schools and removed obstacles to voting. The passage of the Voting Rights Act prompted a massive effort to register Black Americans throughout the South to vote. Again, they were often met with resistance. The push for civil rights continued, with Black Americans ultimately making gains economically, politically, and socially. Now you're ready to answer the question, what was the purpose of the Civil Rights Movement? Pause this video to record your answers on your handout at the first stop sign. Then hit play when you're ready to continue. Let's review. The purpose of the Civil Rights Movement was to end racial segregation across the United States and for Black Americans to gain equal rights. The foundation of the Civil Rights Movement was built by civil rights leaders, organizations, and activists who led hard-fought battles to pressure the state and federal government to pass civil rights laws. Nonviolent protests brought people of the nation together to tackle the core issues of civil rights agenda. Let's look at a few well-known examples of nonviolent protests. The Montgomery bus boycott was a series of protests in Alabama between 1955 and 1956 that targeted segregation on public buses. The Women's Political Council, or WPC, met with the mayor of Montgomery to request changes to the bus system regarding segregation. Some WPC requests included allowing Black Americans to enter the front of the bus instead of the rear and sit where empty seats were available instead of standing. The requests were ignored and plans for a citywide bus boycott began to appear. The attention to Rosa Parks' arrest after refusing to give up her seat on the bus in December 1955 sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Claudette Colvin and Mary Louise Smith had done the same a year prior. The boycott was one of the forces that led the U.S. Supreme Court Browder v. Gale ruling, which deemed segregation on public buses unconstitutional. Beginning in early 1960, the Sit-ins campaign was charged by student activists practicing nonviolent protest strategies to demand an end to racial segregation. The first sit-in took place in Greensboro, North Carolina, on February 1, 1960. 4 Black American students sat down at a whites-only counter at Woolworth's, which launched the campaign. The sit-ins quickly began to gain the attention of local media outlets in Greensboro. 2 months later, more than 50,000 students had participated in the civil rights protest. The sit-ins were a significant civil rights protest campaign that encouraged young activists to become more involved and assume leadership roles in the movement. The Freedom Rides were a nonviolent civil rights protest organized to challenge the segregation of interstate travel facilities and buses. The Freedom Riders started their journey from Washington, D.C. on May 4, 1961. The goal was to travel through the southern states and reach New Orleans, Louisiana for a rally to celebrate. Hundreds of activists across the nation joined the protest. The goals of the Freedom Riders were eventually accomplished several months later, in November 1961. The Interstate Commerce Commission, or ICC, officially banned segregation of all interstate travel facilities within their jurisdiction. Now you're ready to list 3 nonviolent protests of the Civil Rights Movement. Pause this video to record your answers on your handout at the second stop sign. Then hit play when you're ready to continue. Let's review. Several civil rights protests throughout the civil rights movement had a significant impact on policy making and legislation. The 3 most well-known protests were the Montgomery bus boycott, the sit-ins campaign, and the Freedom Riders. The civil rights movement was an empowering time for Black Americans. Efforts of civil rights activists and countless protesters of all races brought about legislation to end segregation. You will use this new knowledge as you engage in the ELA Guidebooks Unit Claudette Colvin, Twice Toward Justice. When you finish this video, be sure to turn in your completed handout to your teacher.